In the past, I've talked about publishers shipping too many books every week for comic book shops to consume and market and basically sell properly, that there's just a product flooding on the shelves. And granted, we're in the middle of these shutdowns. And so, you know, hopefully life is back to normal and this gets to be a problem. Right now, we have no products flooding the shelves, but it still remains a topic. And as things get going again, as we think about comics and where they need to go, there's an answer to that question. How many titles are too much a month? Hey everybody, this is Perch. Like I said, I've talked in the past about there just being too much product on the shelves every week, and that publishers are just slamming these titles in, and it's too much. Comic book shops can't consume it. Customers can't differentiate between what all there is to choose from. And on one hand, it's a good thing that we have lots of content out there. That it's a buyer's market, so to speak. That there's just so much that people can get. But on the other hand, there is just there's too much of it. There's you get lost, and a lot of good titles get lost in that mix. So in the past, I've done videos, and some people have said, one bit of feedback, constructive criticism, if you will, is that you're not specific enough. You talk in generalities rather than specifics, and I think part of it is me kind of adapting to this format. I'm used to having conversations with people, so you bounce off topics, and then you bounce off concepts, and then topics, and then numbers, and so you never really get to the numbers part because there's just me here. So I'm just kind of bouncing things off into thin air. But that's good criticism, and so I'll give you some specifics. How many titles are too much? Well, in a week's time, and I'll qualify this answer this way. I'll give even more details. Uh, what needs to happen is that comic shops need to be able to receive all the titles in a week, need to unpack it, need to be able to understand what it is that they're taking out of the box, have a good sense of the content, meaning, i.e., read the comics. They need to understand a good strategy for how to market it and how to display it, and how to properly find good buyers for those comics. And so in that realm, I would say most comic shops, not giant ones, but kind of the average comic shop, can really consume around 25 books a week. Now, that's a lot less than what people are shipping. And I'm not including in that number of things like graphic novels, collections, reprints, etc. But I think about 20 to 25 titles a week is probably the right amount for a comic shop. And again, that's dramatically lower than what we have today. So I need to explain that. But that probably is a good amount to say, all right, I understand these different books. I understand kind of what's more of a kid audience, horror audience, adult audience, where the tie-ins are, how to group them, everything else. If a comic shop had that amount of books, they would be able to properly kind of market and message and present a product that they feel a little bit more confident in to their customers. Now, there's a bunch of side effects to what I just said. Comic shops, particularly ones that are dependent on new titles, if you suddenly lowered it to 25 books, they would lose a ton of money, or they would not lose money, but they would not make as much money because they are dependent on a greater quantity of books than that. Another thing that would be a casualty if you lowered the books that way is a lot of kind of the new titles, the titles that are more experimental, would vanish. You'd be going to bread and butter books. You would be there would only be room in a cap of 25 total. And I'm not saying 25 by publisher. I mean 25 total. A lot of independent work vanishes. But for a period of time, and I'm going to talk this thing out. It's not going to make a lot of sense right away. It wouldn't be the worst idea in the world for people to take a halt to a lot of these books and really kind of understand how they all need to be marketed and communicated and put out. We have a lot of indie books out there that are just going out, but the market is acclimated to them selling maybe 5 titles total in a store in a given week. And that's not enough. It's not enough for the creators to make a living. It's not enough for that book to be viable. It's not enough books. So the indie market on both the publisher side and the creator side and the shop side needs to recalibrate how they're going to deal with indie titles. Right now, The big publishers benefit from having known characters, known established things. So you don't have to think too much about a title. You're like, I'll throw Deadpool on this one, and sure, it will sell 25 copies, 50 copies, 100 copies, depending on where it is. And we don't really have to put the effort into really thinking about how this product lands, how it's marketed, how it fits. Whereas with the indie books, they do not have that luxury. Every book has to be thoughtful. Every book has to immediately come up with a segment. And the reality is, a lot of comic shops just aren't bothering. So what's happening by having upwards of 40 to 60 books a week is that the comic shops are just there's no breathing room for indie books. So they're going to lead with what's safe and what's known, which is Batman, Spider-Man, X-Men books. On the Image side, it's like, okay, people kind of recognize Spawn. It's telling that if you go into a shop and you go to Image, they're like, what are the big Image books? I'm like, well, Saga, Wick Div. It's like, well, both of those are on hiatus right now. Like, well, Walking Dead, okay, that was canceled. Well, then there's the known stuff like the Spawn and the Savage Dragons and books like that people just know. And it's like, yeah, but Spawn and Savage Dragon, outside the anniversary issues, haven't sold huge numbers. So we're down to kind of the bottom levels already, and that means that the indie books underneath that they get lost. And a lot of these indie books are really quite good. They're not just an Image, but everywhere. There's a lot of really good books. Killock is a really good book. Would you know it exists? Most comic shops don't. They kind of hear some buzz about it. Maybe they order it. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they just got a couple copies of it, but they don't know what to do with it. And the way that comic shops have to engage with their customers is to be able to say, hey, I know you like this. I think you'll like this. Or, hey, you're looking for something that's kind of more action-based, a little bit of Western. Here's a couple books that I know to point you at. But the comic shops themselves aren't educated about what it takes, what that segmentation looks like, what those books look like. And part of it is, there's a lot of reasons behind it, but one contributor is that there's just too many. When Marvel is putting out 80 to 100 books a month, they're drowning out, they're drowning out all the room on the shelf. They're drowning out all the time. The comic shops will quickly, by virtue of just kind of survival, will acclimate to, hey, I'm going to just focus on the stuff that I know will sell and keep the rent coming in, and that's going to be Batman and so on. Unfortunately, that's a defeating strategy, because if you get a Tom King run on Batman and 20% of the readers don't like it, then you have a 20% drop. That's your bulk of revenue that you've fixated on with your shop, and you're in a lot of trouble. To be a successful comic shop, independent of how many titles are being delivered to the shop every week, you have to know your product. And unfortunately, a lot of shops just don't have time, don't know their product, so they go with what's safe. But it's not safe when the big publishers have a tendency to swap out creative teams, change things around. You're at the mercy of somebody else's schedule. If you're a comic shop, you should always be thinking about, how do I put myself in a position of strength? Not power. The publishers still control the product, but you have to consider how you approach it from a position of strength. The best form of strength is education, and education is going to come from knowing your product. And to know your product, you invest time. So in order to invest time, you've got to be able to wrap your arms around the books coming in. So all this traces back to, I think there are too many books being sold for the shop to educate the market, let alone the customers. The other factor of all this is, a lot of customers come in, they don't talk to the comic shop. They don't, they pick up their books, they go. These are silent customers. And many comic shops will tell you that's anywhere from 40 to 60% of the customers are just not saying a word. They're just coming in, buying, leaving. Those people also have to educate themselves somewhere. Where are they going to do that? Do you expect the customers to flip through previews? Are they kind of following certain creators on social media and kind of stumbling into books? When you're producing that volume, the publishers don't have the ability to market successfully their own lineup. The readers and the customers do not have the time to consume it and understand it and digest it. The shop certainly can't help in that process. So it's too many books. So that rule of thumb number, I'm guessing it's about 25. And again, that's a really small number, and a lot of comic shops would be horrified. I've thrown this number out before, and other retailers are like, that would kill me. And I would argue, if that would kill you, then you've got an unsafe business. Now you've got a dangerous model you are not, you're not in a position to succeed based on, if you require 50 books a week in order to turn a profit, then you should be thinking how you bring back control, bring back some power, some strength to you, because that model is destined for trouble. That's just the sheer fact of it. So that's how I think about this. It's how I relate back to that number. That's a rule of thumb number. That's not a scientific number. That's not a carefully researched number. It's just a general, the ability for a shop to consume the product coming in, to be able to market, advertise it, display it successfully. I think that's about the mark. That seems to be the amount that a publisher. I mean, if you think of Marvel and kind of their solicitations and their previews and how they market their books, and you think, all right, if you were really having to focus on 8 books a week, if you're Marvel, 8 to 10 max, I think you're going to have a much better ability to do your own job, to properly put some strength behind those books, to find some creative teams, etc. I think that you will ultimately raise your numbers. But of course, you would be taking a sacrifice in order to get to those numbers. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's not an easy thing. Anyway, that's my number. What's yours? What do you think is a good rule of thumb? What's your logic behind it? Does my logic add up? Is there a flaw? Probably is. Let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear your thoughts on it. Like, subscribe, recommend to a friend. I really appreciate friend recommendations. Follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.